The Ballad of Jazzy Jayhawk. By Harper Hair. Copyright 2020. 1 Jazzy Beginnings. Barry walked. He walked along the path paved with gray asphalt. Slopes, blanketed in green, rose up on either side. Copses of giant bamboo reeds stuck high into the air. Green vines grew over the forest floor, crawled along the bamboo, the scraggly trees, the large brown rope vines. In spots, where light shone through the verdant canopy above, were patches of small colorful flowers shaped like five-pointed and six-pointed stars. These were the woods of Barry's land, and he was pleased with them. These were the woods that Barry loved to walk. Barry walked the path. The terrain leveled off, and Barry came to a road crossing. This old track, which ran between the children's school and the river, did occasionally get cart traffic. Barry looked down the road both ways. The path was clear except for old Tobias, bounding down from some errand, his face still smeared with tomato paste. When was the last time Barry had seen Tobias, who was always wrapped up in his cooking? Tobias was the kind of humble man, Barry reflected, who kept people fed. He was short and stocky, with a shaded but jolly complexion, a fellow whose brow could be knitted even as he let out a bellowing laugh. Oh, old Tobias was a galloping bagful of contradictions. Come to think of it, said Barry to himself, not too different from I. Tobias bounded up to the intersection, the pack he had slung behind his back jostling, a utensil falling loose. He looked back, bent down, and grabbed it triumphantly. I always said, if you see a fork in the road, take it. He held up the multi-pronged eating implement with a triumphant laugh. Good day to you, friend Barry. A fine day it is, fine indeed. Why good day, replied Barry, friend Tobias, you seem to be in fine fettle. As the pair walked down the road together, they struck up a conversation. What, asked Barry, keeps you occupied these days? Your joie de vivre is something to behold. I can tell you my secrets, friend Barry, but most of them you already know. Your commitment to clean living is greater even than my own. And it's no secret to anybody that it's our culture of clean living that makes T-Town such a special place. In his excitement and gusto, Barry noticed, Tobias had truly neglected to wipe his face of tomato paste. It made quite a streak, and whatever had gotten Tobias so preoccupied, Barry looked forward to hearing about it. The thing that's really got me in its grips, so to speak, he continued, is this wrestling match I've seen recently. Wrestling. Barry knew Tobias to be a fanatical follower of the stuff. The T-Town boys had a training gymnasium down by the river. They were known far and wide for their persistence, taking on all comers. The Riverside Amphitheater could ring with their sweaty antics, Barry had heard. But he'd never been to an exhibition there. The terrain had shifted, and now sloped downward to the southwest. Between two bamboo copses, the view let out onto the mighty Apricot River. The turbulent waters crashed against the giant rocks, making Barry nostalgic for battles of old. You should have seen it, Barry. You should have been there. These exhibitions, where traveling wrestlers test their mettle, have the power to inspire. A man can get quite an education in self-sacrifice, perseverance and glory, just by watching one. The event was last Saturday at the Riverside Amphitheater. Some strong boys had traveled all the way from the northern reaches. And there was that Cape Dynamo of fisticuffs, one of the mightiest wrestlers known. I'm talking, of course, about Jazzy Jayhawk. It was the event of the year. Barry's ears perked up at the mention of the Jazzy Jayhawk name. A humble man, Barry was happily occupied in T-Town, gathering lumber for his neighbors and keeping busy with obscure scholarly pursuits. When he wasn't walking the paths, worldly ambition was all but unknown to him. But if there was one person he wanted to meet, it was the distinguished scholar, unparalleled intellect and genius of combat forms, Jazzy Jayhawk. Barry had been an admirer since he could remember. Jazzy Jayhawk was one of the few men who he felt might be able to best him in feats of the mind. And he was always traveling. It made Barry think. These traveling wrestlers, Tobias continued, were the hardiest challengers I ever saw. It must have been a crew that surrounded the redoubtable Jayhawk. The Tulsa boys gave it their all, and they wrestled them to a standstill. We in the crowd were hooting and hollering, so to speak, and raising a commotion like you never saw. The invaders were repelled, and they clearly had the greatest respect for our team. It showed. And then, out stepped Jazzy Jayhawk himself. He was caped in an outfit like the skin of a cunning wren. His face. It's still a mystery. He obscures it with a mask like an oversized purple beak. But it's only a regular mask, and he never used it in the fight for dirty tricks. His physique second to none. The statues of the old demigods pale in comparison. When Jayhawk stepped to the middle of the arena, there was complete silence. And then, he motioned for all the wrestlers left standing 6 strong men to attack him at once. The crowd roared. 6 strong men, and Jayhawk kept up an incredible defense. I know some of those boys, and I talked to them later. Even they don't know how he did it. Deftly manipulating his opponent's momentum, he was able to keep a single combatant from getting to within proper grappling range. In desperation, one boy tried a drop kick off the corner ropes. It was suicide. With a movement of the shoulder, Jazzy Jayhawk sent him flying. And after landing with a thud, he and the rest of our boys got back up and went at him all over again. It was the most inspirational wrestling I've yet seen. The crowd was brimming with gratitude. It's a feeling you've got to experience, Barry. Friend Tobias, your words thrill and excite me. Barry spoke true. The thought of one day meeting the mercurial Jazzy Jayhawk was stuck in his mind, and plans, even had started forming. How did the bout end? With an amicable draw, because of the sportsmanship of Dr. Jayhawk. Even though it was 6 against 1, and our boys could never approach him, Jayhawk pointed out that they had already been exhausted from previous bouts and, in spite of this, had kept up a vigorous attack. As our boys were on the verge of collapse, Jayhawk, standing firm and with no sign of fatigue, called the draw. The referee concurred, and they all stood together, hand in hand, there in the center of the ring. Such a sight I won't forget, not for the rest of my days. Indeed. An inspirational tale, and I thank you for blessing my hearing with it. Barry could only think of the largesse of Tobias' spirit, for giving this treasured yarn, to he, an unworthy, with no experience in wrestling. No experience. The duo walked on, admiring the nature around them, as gentlemen always do when outdoors, and thinking on great deeds of might from days gone by. Friend Tobias, Barry said. May I inquire of what occupies you today? Why certainly, said a puzzled Tobias. There's nothing I have left but to heat up dinner, which won't need to be for a while. I also ate recently. What, friend Barry, is on your mind? Tob, just tell me if you don't dig this idea. I got this thought, have you ever tried your hand at wrestling? Tobias was a sturdy man by all accounts. But his nature was of a shy, hard-working gentleman, retiring into leisure when he had the chance, and dedicated to his work. His eyebrow now rose. Can't say that I have. Neither have I. And I know next to nothing about the sport. Not since we were wee lads, have I grappled with a peer in a true test of strength. Not even to arm wrestle. But what if, for a lark, we were to try our hands at it? They say truly, that you don't know your own ability till you put it to the test. Aye. And the penalty for failure is long-lasting humiliation. We could look like dolts, friend Barry. But what do we have to lose? It's not as if there's any expectation placed on us. If nothing else, it could make for a good yarn to tell the kitchen boys. All right, Bear, you've convinced me. I think the wrestling team might be at the gymnasium even now. They typically train strenuously from noon until supper on weekdays. So I've heard. And I believe we aren't too far from there now. Tobe, forgive me if what I'm about to say sounds strange. Remember when we were boys in the local junior militia chapter? We went out into the woods, on overnight training exercises with our other young friend. One day, I told you that I had had a dream in which you saved our lives. I don't know what became of our other young friend, where life may have taken him. But in meeting me this day, you might save my life yet. The gymnasium was in a wide clearing beside the rushing river. Water crashed roaring against hard rocks, and man crashed roaring against hard man. The air reverberated with grunts. A quick look around told Barry that T-Town and its environs was not wanting for muscle. He was the lithest man in the area by far. Tall and rangy, Barry didn't conform to the wrestling type. He felt as if any other time, he would have seen his physical disparity with every seasoned wrestler as a cause for skepticism of the sense behind his enterprise. But for some reason, today, this didn't bother him at all. Tobias was almost perfectly at home, though his muscle tone wasn't quite as defined as some of the others. But anyone who knew anything, knew that this was no sign of lesser strength in Tobe. A broad, loose circle formed around the central pit, a slight declivity filled with softer dirt to allow for training in heavy throwdowns without causing crippling injuries. All around the perimeter of the area, men worked with weights and sundry exercise devices. Barry couldn't help noticing that there wasn't a single woman in the area. He regretted that there was no gymnasium for woman wrestlers. But he filed this thought for later contemplation. Right now there was pressing work to be done. A few faces turned to briefly glance at the newcomers, turned back shortly to their own tasks. The wind rustled the branches of the trees on the outskirts of the open-air arena, bringing, Barry thought, a fortuitous scent with it. He went up to a fellow practicing strikes on a sort of training dummy with poles sticking out of it, forcing the striker's arm into dexterous configurations in order to make a quick blow. "Friend," he said, "how might an intrepid duo go about applying for this gymnasium?" "So you wanna be wrestler boys?" The guy had dark, close-cropped hair and a sly smile. His physique was on the toned end of the spectrum of gymnasium members. "Well, go up to the pit and talk to the big guy with the red hair and mustache. He's Torval. He'll get you set up." He turned back to his training, now oblivious to the pair. They walked in the pointed direction, and Torval turned to them before they had a chance to speak. He was a massive fellow, safely over 7 feet tall, with legs as thick as tree trunks and arms scarcely less so. His bright red handlebar mustache twirled dashingly, as did the shock of red hair at the top of his formidable cranium. His green eyes were mesmerically piercing on a chiseled, stoic face. He wore a red loincloth and red buskins, and little else. He was an intimidating presence, and Barry wondered if he had been one of the 6 men who had been repelled so effortlessly by Jazzy Jayhawk. He didn't have time to ask. "Challengers, correct?" the giant started in. "Want to join our happy little family? I'm Torval, as you may already know. I take care of all the little doves around here, and I decide who can and can't join. If you can't handle yourself in a sample fight, you'll be wasting your time and everyone else's sticking around any longer. No point having valuable equipment space taken up by fighters with no future. Applying as a pair? Good. I have 2 wrestlers right here that specialize in testing newcomers." He motioned to a short, stocky fellow with muscles like cords on a sailing vessel, and a taller man with a barrel chest and menacingly angular bones. "Get in the pit, and when I say go, the match begins. Go on, now." Barry and Tobias were ushered into the central area of the dusty pit. The many ongoing matches around them began to die down, and more wrestlers gathered along the sides. Torval was making no effort to clear anyone out. Indeed, there was plenty of space for the other matches to continue and for Torval to have a perfect view of theirs. Barry got the feeling that spectating on newcomer tests was a popular pastime around here. Tobias smiled at him. appearing more excited than nervous. The two tester combatants guided their new prey to the proper positions. After a tense split second, Torvald's stoic shout rang out, "Go!" Next, all was dust and chaos. Immediately, with seasoned precision, the short fighter took Barry, the taller, Tobias. Barry could see briefly that Tobias was setting his weight against the onslaught of swift blows he was receiving, attempting to get within grappling range. Then, a strange calm entered through the back door of Barry's mind as the short fighter lunged like a hyena. Barry twisted wildly, trying to keep his attacker from hitting him with the force of full momentum. The effort came to nothing as the little man gripped Barry's legs with thick, iron ropes of arms that anchored him in place and sought to topple. By now, Barry couldn't understand how he could remain so calm. In his mind, instead of desperate stratagems, the thought came that, to an onlooker, wrestling could probably seem kinda homoerotic. Actually, he couldn't fault such an idea, and why not? People had the right to love who they loved, and no two ways about it. But he would never want to just assume that he knew what lay in someone's heart. Yet an odd thought kept persisting, one that he couldn't dislodge. He thought of being gripped by the knees by a prostitute, a lady of the night. The image was so strong that it was as if, looking down, he was seeing not a tough fighter, but a lithe and buxom courtesan, skilled in the arts of love-making, pulling, tugging, clinging to his lower body with her upper body, holding on for dear life, never letting go till his energy was drained. The visual illusion was striking. Barry felt slightly ashamed for imposing this on his fellow combatant, but it was really unintentional, without preconception. The courtesan clung there, unable to be dislodged, and Barry continued to feel the strange calm. But he knew that if he didn't take action soon, the strong man would have no trouble toppling him. Barry didn't understand why it hadn't happened already. It was as if he had entered a zone of slow down or stop time. If he was going to prevail, he would have to dislodge the courtesan. There was no gentle way to do it. He would have to. But no. Barry realized something. At this point, the courtesan image had really taken over, melding itself with the wrestler and, in turn, with the iron grip Barry felt on his thighs and legs. The visual apparition was of a sweet, tender-looking lady-in-waiting, delicate and gentle in nature, and he could only be glad that he wasn't the type of man to be quickly inflamed, or there could be real problems. But it didn't matter that it was only an image. Barry could never lift a hand in violence against a lady, even if it meant his life. He had to accept the consequences of his principles, of his solemn vows against violence to innocence. He had to. Suddenly, the world went blank, and was replaced by a clear radiance emitting from all angles of empty space. Barry was overtaken by a feeling. What Barry felt at that instant, was nothing short of the unmistakable essence of white knighthood. It radiated from space's every angle, and from Barry's every pore. It refreshed and cleansed his spirit. He briefly forgot everything as he was anointed. And from this shining void, a figure materialized. Barry squinted. Could it be? Barry was an incorrigible heathen, he knew, a black-hearted doubting Thomas who was an undue frustration to the spiritual community. Yet here in the effervescent mist, a figure was composing itself, which had the unmistakable outlines of the shortest, lithest, most sinewy of the 6 demigods. When he was young, children and adults alike had always remarked that Barry's figure made him look like a tall version of Finklin, the guardian star of swashbucklers. Now, Barry saw Finklin standing before him, in the flesh. And a cry came unbidden to his unbelieving lips: "Saints be praised! Congratulations, my valued son!" The demigod, somehow shorter than him, yet also taking up infinite space, smiled on Barry. "You have passed the test of chivalry. You are hereby anointed a mystical scholar of knighthood, and what's more, a fulfiller of radiant destinies. I predict great things. But only you can know where to go on your journey. Just remember one thing, for in all your travails it might be of value, though you understand its value or not. Anything that exists, has two sides, and likely many more. Anything that doesn't have at least two sides, doesn't exist. Now off with you. As abruptly as he was pulled from the world, Barry was plopped back into it. The first thing he saw was the waving of the branches in the breeze. Then he heard the roar of the crowd. Later he remembered a guy yelling, "How is he not down yet?" He looked down. Almost without thinking, he grabbed the short but powerful grappler who still twisted on his legs with desperately straining muscles and lifted him over his head. The crowd erupted. Holding his profanity-shrieking opponent aloft like a toddler, Barry turned in time to see an ecstatic Tobias putting the finishing touches on the human pretzel that was his former opponent. Then, he heard Torvald's booming, cavernous laugh. "All right. Enough. That was a fine display. You pass. Come tomorrow, if you can, and I'll personally show you some tag team tricks. You may have heard that the gymnasium is sending out a traveling group to represent T-Town in a week or so." Here he briefly cocked an eyebrow at Barry. "If you continue to show promise, you might be given the option of joining the caravan." He grinned widely. "But remember the first rule of wrestling. Don't get complacent. All right, it's dinner time. Everyone scram." At a casual wave of Torvald's mighty arms, the gymnasium began rapidly clearing out for the day. It was plain that everyone in attendance had been watching the fight. The duo walked on in the soft twilight. The first stars were peeking out, scintillating in the cool breeze. In these waning days of summer, it seemed like the humidity might finally be lifting. The sky near the horizon had that electric blue color that always betokens crisper air blowing in from somewhere, cleaning out the dank miasma of the dog days, even if only temporarily. Tobias was beside himself. "That was a capital idea, friend Barry. We make an ideal team. And with the way my understudy is coming along in the kitchen, I'm more than certain I can afford a trip. In fact, I owe it to myself to broaden my horizons a bit. But tell me something. Unless I miss my guess, you have more on your mind than just wrestling. I saw the way your eyes lit up at my mention of Jazzy Jayhawk. My dear man. Your powers of deduction do you credit. When delivering wood just last week, I had heard from a neighbor that the T-Town boys were putting a traveling team together, and having heard it, I thought no more of it. Now, you may have heard of my dabbling in the field of mycology. I don't think there's a scholar living with more authority in this field than Dr. Jayhawk. Quite so. His strains and breeding methods have helped to enhance many a dish. And there's no need for modesty, self-effacing though you be, I've heard reports of your scholarly prowess. A conversation between you two could advance the field. But even so, to take up a sport you've never shown interest in, and travel hither and yon, with no notion of where the mercurial old bird even is, for the sake of a chat? Is there not more? Tobe. I'll thank you not to refer to one of this young century's most distinguished, and accomplished, gentlemen of the brotherhood scholarly, as a mercurial old bird. But I know you jest. And your deduction is sharp as ever. Truth is, I can well imagine going through all sorts of stuff for the pleasure of talking to such a remarkable man. But that's not all. If you would be my dinner guest this evening, I can show you things that may surprise you. 2 performance-enhancing dreams. Barry's place in the world, in life, was on the trail, contemplating, thinking. He walked the trails, bamboo walking stick in hand. He belonged to the forest. And he sniffed the mushrooms. He loved the earthen taste of the forest. He was not a homebody. Yet for all that, his modest home had a comfy feel. Tobias lounged comfortably in an easy chair, feeling out the pains of a day of hard work in the kitchen, then merciless combat. His muscles cried out in relief at the respite. And he marveled at the energy of the man known as Barry. Without a trace of jitters, with nothing but the good, wholesome natural energy of clean living, Barry seemed able to continue forever. Now he was throwing some mushrooms in his cooking pot. The aroma that arose was earthy but intoxicating. Tobias sighed. The compact two-story log cabin's most prominent feature was its many bookshelves. The wealth of significant tomes found therein covered all manner of topics, literary, scholarly, and beyond. The only bias Tobias could find among the names, was for a preoccupation with the alchemical arts. This was even more evident in the rare, often quaint curios and fine artworks that littered what little surface area there was in the small downstairs. Tobias had received a start at the sight of the dread Ingulfo's engravings of Flemish maniac Hyssonitis. He had been taken aback to find a small, authentic-looking Mauritanian cathead deity, fashioned ingeniously in interlocking jade and lapis lazuli. He would have looked more, but weariness overtook him, and Barry had directed him to the seat from which he now could hardly imagine ever emerging. Having dropped the last sprig in the bubbling dinner concoction, Barry now put a lid on the pot and, walking to where Tobias slumped, seated himself on a wooden stool. There are many types of effect that can be had through the ingestion of plant matter, he said. Fungus is one of the most unique and mercurial of ingestants. The two most commonly known effects are poisoning, often fatal, and the procuring of visions, sometimes wonderful, sometimes horrible. These are only the most obvious fungal effects, however. There is no ceiling to the potential unknown number. My research has led me to another effect, obtainable in certain specially grown and cultivated fungus in a way not seen elsewhere. Observe my musculature. Barry rolled up his sleeve, showing the lean, rangy muscles of his left arm. Now observe. He popped a small mushroom into his mouth. Suddenly, without flexing, the arm muscles simultaneously expanded in both size and tone, ever so slightly, but enough to be noticed. But, protested a suddenly wide-awake Tobias, the nutrients from that mushroom haven't had time to be absorbed into your bloodstream. Why, you just popped it into your mouth, man. Barry laughed pleasantly. Right you are, Tobe. What you've witnessed is only the beginning. The primary effects of this fungus, which I've named enderines, after my first ancestor to study mycology, Hyardalis are long-term. The muscles are strengthened in a wholesome and sustainable manner, with the best results coming from a single mushroom a day, fresh or dried. Barring food allergies, there are no adverse effects, unless an unreasonably large amount is consumed, a foolhardy idea anyway, since it would waste mushrooms for limited returns. I have tested it not only on myself, but in small amounts on some of the animals of the forest. I admit I questioned my own ethics, but the squirrels were fine, and you should have seen them jump. Keeping track of both them and myself, I've found that the body acclimates to the beneficial effects. For just 1 week of once daily consumption, muscle results typically start to degrade a year after cessation. Longer consumption periods mean longer before the benefits wear off. I estimate that if I were to stop eating these beauties tomorrow, it would be something like a decade before I'd start to see a loss of conferred advantage. If you decide to try them, the only minor side effect to be warned of is a slight, occasional increase in the vividness of dreams, but no change in their character or frequency. I should tell you that I don't wish to apply pressure one way or another. You've shown yourself abundantly capable without my help. Bear. Surely you jest. That I should confuse you for a common quack. If anyone knows their stuff, it's you. Give me one of those little fellows without hesitation. And then, if it's all the same to you, let's eat. After a hearty stew, Tobias, still enwrapped by the changes going on in his biceps and triceps, retired graciously to the downstairs daybed, and Barry climbed the ladder to his sanctum, carefully balancing a cup of his patented herbal bedside tea. There was rough work ahead. He looked up through his large skylight at the constellations of late summer passing into fall, sipping gingerly. No time for writing tonight, nor even to put another coat of paint on his latest work. He needed all the rest he could get. He finished the tea and lay languidly on his mystically levitating silk mattress. Soon, the dreams came. He floated through the night, incorporeal and ghostly. The lonely places under the moon greeted his spirit. He stretched out on the wind, gliding on the velvet ether. Soon he would be on the road, far from home. He felt the distances call to him. This was the right approach. But there was bigger quarry. He floated into recollection. The space was like a dim, twilight version of the empty shining place where he had met Finklin. And then, she was there. His beautiful maiden, the lost lady love of his heart Morgo. Now he was a powerful alchemist, though he discussed this with nobody. But once, all he had wanted was to make Morgo his love, and live with her in peace and harmony. What had become of those innocent days? He knew too well. Morgo. She put a hand to her lips. Morgo was a short, sharp-eyed woman with thin hair and a slight, angular frame. She dressed sensibly, but in Barry's dream the colors of her clothing were darkened. Barry. You are in a liminal place. Not just here in dream. In life. In time. Your world is a liminal place. You don't know me anymore right now. You don't need to, but I've become a strong witch too. Your heart has special properties. Barry. You must open the liminal space wider. Open it for the dimensions. More dimensions are needed. When you open the space, you can travel in infinite dimensions when you need and want to. My work is special, long-term. I play the long game. Barry, don't get caught up in glory. We need you to stay focused. You will meet a lot of people. Don't look too closely at their defects. Everything will change. Defects of yesterday will morph into virtues of today. This is the remarkable property of this liminal time and place. I want you to be ambitious. Be ambitious, boy. All doors are open now, and they always shall be. And think of me as your friend. I'm your friend. Forever. But don't lose track and focus too much on the past. We need you to widen those spaces. The past. The past. The past. The past. The past, the past, the past, the past, the past. Morgo and Barry were to be wed. And he would mess it all up. It was he, Barry Barely, the big beef-chucking boy, who made his baby sad. Did he say sad? He meant miserable. There, in those glimmerish past halls, the villain Gaspordu. He had enticed Morgo with his hoodlum wiles, taking her off on a fling. Barry betrayed. Barry blasted. Gaspordu gasping with malicious mirth. Gasp gasp passed gas. Gad. He passed gas all over the good times. He had many games and many hands, and now his hands and his hoods had invaded the angry office of a bist off Perry. But Perry had come up with the readings. No. Foolish youth. And had come up with a scheme. A mad scheme. The memory seared. It. Gaspordu and his two lackeys had invaded Barry's office of the time, rifling through his correspondence. Gaspordu was convinced, against all rationality, that Barry was threatening Morgo to keep the wedding on. And now, he could see that it wasn't true, and it made him even more mad. He began throwing papers. He was inconsolable. His hoods held panic in their voices. It was Barry. He was coming down the hall. Gaspordu didn't care. He was sure the guy had done something wrong. Let him come in, let him give himself away. Barry burst in. Sabotage. But Barry had been studying some papers of his own. Dark arts. At that time in his life, Barry had nothing but contempt for the art of hand-to-hand combat. But there was another type of wrestling move, an arcane maneuver that few even knew the existence of. Gaspordu turned with contempt. This weakling? Stand back, boys. He would be finished in no time. Barry jumped up to his desk. Gasportu came confidently on. Barry tapped Gasportu lightly on the shoulders. Oh, all ya heinous incantations. Oh ya howling dark chasms and ya n-dimensional voices. Ye plasms, chant with me, for a growing boy needs his milk. So Barry chanted, he chanted under his breath, closed his eyes, and swayed slightly. Then, the two hoods could never quite agree on what happened. To tell it like the police records had it, Barry picked the boss up, flipped him over, and did a spinning pile driver on him from his desk to the floor. Cops like things nice and simple, after all. Even when they knows that things ain't nice and simple. What was it like? Imagine a man levitating, being gripped, spinning around, but not simply in space. Spinning in dimensions. And as if flipping clumsily through a Rolodex, one of the man's dimensions gets creased in just the right/wrong way, creased so that it doesn't sit flush again. Gasportu was never quite the same after that. The doctors said it was natural, in a scuffle, that sometimes something in the head got jiggled loose. The human body is a delicate thing. Even with a healthy young man like the boss, something unexpected can happen. They said it was nobody's fault. But Barry knew. Barry knew. Morgaux's face cut through the thick fog of memory. Don't get lost in the past. Her voice held an air of authority. Morgaux, I can't. I made you sad. I wanted us to be together. More than anything. I'm so sorry, forget it. Morgaux faded into the distance. Barry knew he couldn't follow her. And for a moment, he wondered if Morgaux was real, if Gasportu and his pair of goons had ever really existed. His semi-conscious mind was unsure of the reality of anything that it had recollected. But no. He was certain there was a Morgaux, even if that was only a nom de plume, and that she was a powerful witch like he was. And whether or not he had ever met her, there was one thing he was more sure of than anything, certainty that permeated every speck of his being. He still loved her. Then, forgetting all, he awoke. 3 Age of Heroes, Rage of Zeros. Barry plopped his pack onto the back of the wagon and grunted. He felt tired. Tobias and Torvald were still in the station cafe chatting. They were fast friends, after only a week of training. About 8 wrestlers loitered about the dusty T-Town wagon station loading area. Barry got along well with everyone, had no disrespect for anyone, but he had learned during this week that many of his teammates were just not very interesting people. The loading area smelled of horses and dirt. Over on the spectator platforms, a few listless boys watched and pointed at the general area Barry occupied. He looked forward to sleeping in the wagon. The wrestling game wasn't too lucrative for the individual wrestler. Most guys who did it were trying to get an ego trip out of their muscles. Dusty boys with no contemplation in their souls. Torvald tried to make a joke out of being like a mother to them, but their real mothers were probably mostly absent. This was the island of misfit toys. These boys really had no future. Their only virtue was persistence. Well, Barry knew a thing or two about persistence. He knew a thing or two. He had enough concentrated mushroom powder to last him and Tobias several months. Now he knew, deep in his marrow, that most of the towns on the road would provide no challenge. And he knew, from his clairvoyant observations, that this would be no ordinary wrestling tour. Strange magic was roaming the land. This was the dawn of a mighty era. Now Torvald and Tobias were coming out of the cafe. The last straggler, a flabby fellow, was throwing his pack on board. The cart speed mules chomped on their bits. The morning air hummed with a sudden chorus of grasshoppers. "Everyone to your cart," yelled Torvald. And Barry knew, with a sudden flash of inspiration, that Torvald, that mighty giant who had so easily been repelled by Jazzy Jayhawk, would not live much longer. Then he climbed onto his car, and without looking at anybody, went to sleep. Men. Listen to me. We are the ruthless ones. White knights should be destroyed. The cavernous vocal spectre roused him. It was past midday, judging by the sun. The bamboo white, vine-covered terrain had let out onto a pleasantly rolling meadow. Now, the car was abuzz with speculation on the curious flowers that had started to appear. They were large and bulbous, the size of an incredibly obese 12-year-old. With round green trunks and green tendrils sticking out like rudimentary arms, they had a faintly menacing quality. Yet one couldn't but admire the beauty and variety of the strikingly bold colors on their fat petals. Each flower appeared to have 8, in a fat horizontal disc, crowning the brightly verdant trunks. The overall effect this odd flora, now spaced throughout the visible area of the sea of grass, had on the viewer, was to put them in a space between morbidity and good cheer. The caravan halted. It was time for a brief lunch. Wrestlers shuffled to the back of their carts, riffled around for a snack. Most began to gather away from the wagons. Conversation was struck up. Has anyone ever heard of these here plants? Reckon there's a lot of plants in this United States. Yeah, but as swift as them speed mules is, we can't be all that far from Olt town. I doesn't even know what way we're going. Maybe an uncommon road. Can't be too uncommon. It's well marked out enough. Boys, is we botanists, or wrestlers? I can't be surprised the group don't have good plant knowledge. Wait y'all. I think I saw one move. Suddenly, the attack was upon them. It was an ambush in plain view. And what struck Barry first was the uncanny speed with which the plants moved. Then all was chaos, muscled man beating on ghastly green tendril as tanned human bodies and brightly colored sentient plant matter spun and twirled and blended together in an orgy of pummeling. The uncanniness was almost too much for some men, who laughed giddily. But while there was a bit of blood being let, from bleeding nose or busted lip, there was a lot more of the green stuff. Chlorophyll juice began to fall in a stick drizzle around the battlefield, and here and there, small bright bodies had begun to untwist themselves from man flesh. It looked like the foe might be on the retreat. But the worst was yet to come. From behind a larger hill not far from the treeline, there came a chilling roar, impossible to describe. With astonishing speed, the mother of this plant colony showed itself and charged. None could say just how such an ungainly form moved so fast. It was the same shape as the others, the same proportions. But this time, it was 10 feet tall, with wide purple petals of impossible plumpness. And its tendrils were like a green hurricane. Torvald immediately stepped out in front. "Be careful," called out Tobias. Barry was surprised at this display of emotion. The honorable thing was to allow an experienced wrestler to face combat on clear-cut terms, not to tell him to be careful. But then there was a lot he didn't know about his fellows. Torvald squared up. He was like a mama bear, ready to protect his cubs at all cost. And the massive flora was come to collect. It flailed, and despite his valiant effort, the tendrils caught and lifted up the mighty man with ease. Then the sickening occurrence. Oh, the sludging, gludging sounds of terror, the horror of it all, the horror, as some mouth-like opening at the very top swallowed Torvald to submersion. He was gone for a hair-trendingly tense half-minute. For a half-minute, no one made a sound. All eyes were on the abomination. And then, to shrieks of terror from the wrestlers, a red-haired, red-mustached skeleton briefly popped back out, before even this was again submerged, digested. Everyone was besides themselves. There was hand-wringing and plaintive moaning from every corner of the crowd, and it seemed like the forces of a mad nature were mustering. Looking at the scene of carnage, Barry said, "Let me test this thing." Pulling off his shirt and throwing it down, his rangy form strode towards the angry plant mother. The floral nemesis made no move, waiting for its quarry to serve itself up. Immediately when in range, the tendrils whipped wildly, seemingly in a blind frenzy. Closer inspection showed a deadly accuracy. Barry, matching precision with precision, began his dance. Leaping around, graceful, he looked to the onlookers like a beautiful gazelle. He flew through the air with an aloofness that felt carefree. But even as he dodged more and more precisely, he was picking up speed. He flew. He backflipped. He was like a magnificent ballerina, the tendrils like elastic batons of a schizophrenic conductor. He leapt onto a petal. Now, at the top of the flower, he saw the offending orifice. Unlike the smaller plants, this monster had a mouth. But not just any old mouth. No ho ho ho. This was a giant, luscious, corpulent, sensuous, putrescent and well-formed pair of devil lips that left Barry feeling weak at the knees to look at. And now, the nightmare mouth was opening back up. Barry thought back to the vision of the harlot he had had at the initiation. But no. This heinous, ever-loving thing was no lady, not by any standards. He wanted to sock it where it hurt. Alchemical fortification number 9, he muttered to himself, as he prepared his body and mind for the incantation that he'd learned so long ago, and almost forgotten till today, to configure his flesh in the proper way for his new purpose. Then, he dived right in. Gasps. Shudders. What kind of a madman? Was he that new guy? The more level-headed men were now busily planning the best formation to root the smaller plants quickly, so that a last-ditch all-in rush could be made on the queen by all hands. In the sticky digestion, Barry could hardly detect a trace of what once had been Torval, so quickly did the plant's system work to absorb the nutrients. Now, Barry flexed. He focused. And the plant queen sucked. It sucked like a plant possessed. Barry rolled around in the greasy maw. All was dark, but not quiet. The plant was contracting and expanding, tightening and shaking, and working its every digestive trick on this creature that was harder than any stone it could imagine. But the creature refused to be digested. And then, the heat. Barry concentrated on ejecting waves of searing heat from his now kill-like body. Like a bubbling bog sore, the plant queen felt itself melting. It was not something its semi-sentient mind would ever have planned for. First the horrible luscious lips exploded in a greasy red spray, blanketing the area with a smell like that of fresh-cooked cheesy broccoli. The purpurate pugilist petals burst into oiled flame, resolving themselves into a sooty black dew that wafted its picturesque curses up on the high winds, bound for heaven's residence. The weaker-willed wrestlers tittered. Then the aperture's sides began to melt in and widen like a morning hole in one. The zest of its stink reinvigorated Barry. As the dark green jelly of his erstwhile foe plopped about him, he put his arms to his sides and let out a roar of glory like the Jayhawk. The smaller plants, without their leader, were demoralized. A colorful pageant of petals retreated rapidly across the plain, in the direction opposite the caravan and its wrestlers. For a moment, all was calm. Then, the morning began. Their intent even anything left of our dear Torval, wailed one inconsolable fellow. Tobias, though he'd only known the man for a week, was visibly shaken. Barry noted his sensitive heart. Other wrestlers were breaking down in open sobs. All around, men were covered in sticky green, many with greenish scars along parts of their body. One man pulled a piece of tendril from out of his ear. It was a dismal breadth. The good one vanished. He was taken from us. Too soon. More wailing. Dolefulness. Lament. Barry waited a respectful length. Gentlemen, he said, and as his skin loosened back to its normal form, it seemed to have a radiance. Please consider. We have lost a good man, and to many of us, a dear friend. I am but an upstart to this group. I would never presume to have nearly the capacity to take over the varied responsibilities of that fine man. But for the leadership of this single expedition, I can fill his shoes better than anyone. And why? Not only have I shown my cool head in an emergency, and I think we'll be seeing more of those. More vital is my sense of mission. For I have seen the direction we must go. As men of honor, you must know as well as I do, but I am the one with the courage to say it first. My hearties, it is our duty, for the glory of the bout, to track down the location of that incomparable scholarly gentleman, that once in a generation brawler and man of utter tactics. I'm talking about Jazzy Jayhawk, if you were too stupid to get it already. I can and will lead us, demigods willing, and we can and will fight him again, for some of you. We owe this mighty spectacle to the viewers, the fanatics, to the people. And this time, we won't lose. Who's with me? The meadow erupted in cheers. Saints be praised, cried Tobias. And then, the light of inspiration shined on Barry. He walked back over to the sullen cluster of wagons. The speed mules were still snorting anxiously, not quite over the excitement. He walked to his pack. Previously he'd been concerned about the fungal powder being discovered by jealous rivals. Now, he pulled it out without concern. He had planned to carefully ration it. But this was the use he needed it for. Walking over to the speed mules, he carefully poured a pile into the palm of his hand. And, holding it out, he let the beasts, one by one, take a lick of the wonder substance. Seconds after licking, the definition in their already powerful haunches sharpened and expanded. The wrestling troupe marveled. "Gentlemen," cried Barry. "There's not a moment to lose. Finish what's left of your repast, take a ration sip from your canteens, and hop back in your cars. This great nation awaits our prowess. Forward." In the lead cart, maps were spread out. The vision of leader Torval, said a flunky, was to make a tour of these great United States, touching locations at most major cultural regions. You can see by these markings that the planned route is roughly circular. We start out heading generally south, deep into mossy swamp country. Here, the mighty Gator tribe holds sway. Our work is immediately cut out for us, since they're some of the world's best wrestlers. But this is far from the only danger down there. Torval represented this first phase of the journey as a culling of the weak. Next, we head westwards through arid wastes. Powerful tribes live all along this barren path, though they're rarely spotted. After a great time, we should reach the mystic shores of the Pacific. That ocean's air has led to the development of the most powerful human muscles the world has ever known. At the northern border before Great Wilderness is an autonomous zone, a place with little use for wrestlers. We should head east before that. Torval's courageous ambitions called for going through territory scarcely charted, where little-known tribes hold furtive conclaves. At last, we come to the Great Lakes and their great arenas. If we're to track Dr. Jayhawk, this might be the most likely place, the most renowned center of fighting on the planet. But we'll have to apply everything we've learned to get through the gates. Fighters from around the world travel to the Great Lakes for the honor of competition there, where the best in the world compete in tournaments daily. What's more, Dr. Jayhawk is likely beset at every turn by fighters of varying quality who seek him out as we do. As a distinguished man of letters, he hardly has time to entertain every ruffian who comes his way, so that even if he is at the great arenas, he'll surely have systems in place. Yes, we know all that, said Barry. Proceed. Once we're done at the Great Lakes, we may travel to the great metropolises to the northeast, in order to do any necessary restocking. The fighters there are nothing to be sneezed at, but honorable wrestling is less popular in an environment that favors tricky below-the-belt tactics. This does not carry over to spectators, however, who are hungry for all forms of entertainment. We should then head through the archaic Misty Mountain region, haunt of strange and terrible old things, to head back towards the grasslands of home. This last leg of our journey, if we reach it, may be the most perilous, but Torval was not willing to skirt the area to avoid strange challenge. Then again, Torval perished on the first leg of the journey. Have some respect, said Barry, pointing a sharp finger at the flunky. I'm sorry. I think I'm just a little numbed by all that's happened. Torval, he wanted us to be challenged. Wanted us to grow, Barry. I know you probably think I'm just a flunky, and you're right. But if my mind is hollow, my heart isn't. And it was touched. We all were. But then, he died so quickly. What hope for us? I know this has done something to group morale, Barry. I know these things. Now listen here, flunky. I like that you speak your mind. Don't change that. But feel free to change everything else. And especially, change your attitude. And that goes double for the rest of you. Torval had a great vision. And he knew it would come to pass. And he knew this, because he knew the same thing I know, and now I'm letting all of you know. That something is this: a wrestler with persistence in their heart can do a lot. But there are limits. There are limits. But a scholar can do anything. A gentle person can do anything. There are no limits to what we can do. Because we're not just a wrestling group anymore. From here on out, every one of us is scholars. Remember this one phrase: if you forget all else to a scholar, anything is possible. Is that understood? The group of senior wrestlers bowed their heads in shamefaced acknowledgement. There was no specific reason for their shame. They didn't understand what he was talking about. They were simply cowed by Barry's overpowering charisma. We are scholars. And we will damn well show conduct becoming of scholars. And the first law, the golden rule, the incarnate seed of all scholarliness, as we gentlemen know only too well, is level-headed courage in the face of the unknown. A fighter fights out of fear. I want you to not fight. Should I really have to be saying this? You men have done this for years. I'm the one who just got here. So show it to me. Show me your scholarly courage. And together, as a group, not as separate panicky egos, we will make Torval's vision our vision, and make our vision a reality. Now where are we stopping the night? There's a little outpost with an inn and a friendly saloon, said Flunky, on the grassland, shortly before the border to the Dankwoods and the beginning of the outer Southlands. Normally it'd be dark before we'd see it, but with the performance enhancement you gave the speed mules, our current rate has us there by sundown. It's the last whiff of warmth and civilization before seemingly endless grey marshlands. We admire your commitment to clean living, Barry, but a stop to the saloon could really boost everyone's morale. Make it so, said Barry. Where there's a saloon, there's often talk. And, one hopes, experienced travelers, open to questions. It appeared as the sun kissed the horizon, smaller even than Barry was expecting, a dot on the prairie. A single main street showed a druggist, a post office, a dry goods shop, a sheriff's office, and a few lesser administrative facilities, clustered together and dwarfed by the main attraction, the capacious tinsel facade of the Jacques Immerns Inn and Saloon. With its conspicuous grandiosity, Barry had little doubt that it housed prostitutes and a gambling den. This was a tendril of the Southland's vile decadence, come to stick a probe in the outer nostril of the wholesome plains lands. It was well to be on one's guard. A few stragglers went to and fro across the street, finishing up the day's chores. In the distance, the black Dankwoods tree line was faintly visible by gloaming light. The little caravan pulled into the corral on the outpost's outskirts without incident. Flunky tipped the corral boy, who scampered to tend to the speed mules. Finest I ever saw. What you all been feeding them? Tobias gave Barry a knowing glance. The men were tired, still visibly shaken. But they had no qualms about enjoying a berry evening. One thing was agreed: it wouldn't be as late as usual. Nobody believed they'd much want to do any carousing after 10 p.m. anyway. And one thing, called Barry before the group split. I know I can't regulate your alcohol intakes, when you'll be without strong drink for weeks after tonight. Would that I could cure you of the devilish urge. It's exactly the same with prostitution, though if I ever find any one of you hasn't behaved as a gentleman, getting booted from the group in the middle of the wilderness won't be a speck of snow on the tip of the iceberg of the hurt I'll put you in. But whatever you do, there's to be no gambling whatsoever. Not a penny. Because when you lose all your funds pointlessly to this odious addiction, it will be your comrades that will end up carrying you through. And that will quickly create a domino effect that will put the whole of our resources into disarray. Oh, it's a vile habit. You don't need to look surprised. I know the kind of place by looking at it. If you want fame and fortune, my hearties, rest up, muster your strength and be prepared to work for it. And with that, the group split.